So here we are at Holistic Petite Gym in Ramsbottom, just on the outskirts of Manchester. And today we are taking me through a testing session. So this is something that I would do with my athletes, and also something, being a part-time athlete myself, full-time athlete some people might say, or just a try-hard amateurist is probably a more appropriate way of putting it. We're here today to put me through my paces. So this morning we've already done my blood work, which you can't see there because Dr. Ben did such an excellent job at taking my blood work. And this is part of our subscription service with Invictus, as you can see the products. Here, finally arrived and will be ready to rock really soon.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what events you've got coming up and what kind of training you're going to be doing for those events in the next 3 to 4 months?
Cool. So I am a ultramarathoner, if you will. I'm not a fast one, middle of the pack runner, just to put myself in context before people think I'm a super duper athlete. So I've just come to the end of a big training block now, probably my largest training block to date, which is why it's important to get my blood work done, just to see how my body's responded to that training block, hence why we're doing the testing today as well. I have, over the next few months, I've got a few events that are kind of what you would call training events. So starting this weekend, I am a sweeper, which, to those of you who don't know, an ultramarathon, a sweeper goes at the back really slowly and just make sure people are making calls for checkpoints. And that is at the GB Ultras Chester 100 miler. I'm doing the first 50 miles of that and then sleeping in a village hall and then doing the last 17 miles in the morning. So I'll be covering around about, well, it'll be nearly 70 miles. So I'm not going to do the conversion into old money, 100 odd kilometres. So my first race of the year is the Threshold Trail Series Race to the King, which is a 100 kilometre race. It's a loop race down on the south coast near Goodwood. And that should take me around about 15 to 16 hours. But what I'm doing is to build towards my big event at the end of the year is I'm running the 100k on the Saturday. And then I'm doing a 50k trail race, trail event, which isn't a race, but it's just what I'm doing on the Sunday, and then 25k on the Monday, 25k on the Tuesday. So I'll be covering 200 kilometers over the space of 4 days. And if that goes well and my legs haven't fallen off and my body's in fairly good health, then the big one is it's called the Brutal 300, which is a loop race based at Llanberis. Hopefully I haven't butchered that too badly for my North Walian friends. Llanberis in North Wales near Snowdonia, and that's basically a loop race where you can sign up to do 100 mile, 200 mile or 300 mile, and you basically just have to keep going for as long as you can within that period. The target is 300 miles. I'd be happy with 200, to be honest. I'd be happy with 150 at this point. We'll see how it goes. And so, yeah, there's specific cut-offs you've got to make within that. So you have to do the first 100 miles within, I think it's 34 hours. So this event this weekend is a really good test for that slower pace to see how I feel after 50 miles, so that then I can then continue onwards and hopefully make those cut-offs. So also today I'm going to do my VO2 max and lactate threshold testing. Yeah. As a performance nutritionist who's worked with some amazing level athletes, you know, what value do you see in doing that kind of testing?
I think the first thing that we need to look at is what we're looking at getting from this today. It's not just scores, not just numbers, but data that we can use to find out where your limitations are. Using that, you find out where those limitations are, we can then look at what you're going to do for your own programming, for your own training and your nutrition, and look at what adaptations do we need to make from a nutrition perspective, or what I would make from a nutrition perspective, to ensure that those limitations aren't going to be the things that kind of crop up during a race or during your prep. A lot of people think, oh, it's a VO2 max. What's your VO2 max? What's your LT? Ultimately, if you just hang on, what are the numbers? Then fair enough, but it's not just the numbers, and that's not what we're here for. We're here for looking at what does the data show us, how can we make improvements, what do we need to be aware of. And as a nutritionist, I always come in lift the bottom limitation just a little bit higher and you're going to improve overall performance. But make sure you lift it a little bit higher and in the right direction of where you want to go as well.
So before we get this profiling done of me today, being a slightly larger than average runner, is there any limitations that straight away you would say, okay, this might be an issue for you within an ultra or endurance sports?
I mean, yes, I would. I would always err on the side of the lighter the better for ultra. I think everyone would accept that. But also, it's going to be looking at just how useful are you at using oxygen? How useful? Where are you likely to have issues because you hold significantly more muscle than your average ultra runner? Yes, you will get the odd beast, but I certainly say that when you rock up on the start line, you're one of the more heavily muscled ones, and is that muscle serving you? Are you better just going for lighter? But also, do you want to lose that muscle? There's more to what happens just from start to finish line, as in you've got a life, probably have aesthetic goals as well, like to look and feel a certain way. So I would be looking at like, how does this all fit in for you as a, not just a performance strategist, but also as what you do in general life, but also as a business owner as well. And how can this data then feed into the bigger picture of life? You know, you're not a professional athlete, but you do train like the hours that a professional athlete would probably put in. And you're probably, you know, with your knowledge and with the team and all the data that we collect, you're probably not far off pushing at higher levels. So for me, I would be looking at how do we use this data for you as an individual, not just for race day, not just for prep, but also like, does it have use of health and outside of just performance as well?
I think from my perspective, there's a few different reasons why I'm interested in this. Obviously, the first is to identify limitations, see how the engine's working and what we can improve on, but also to identify kind of like performance potential. So for example, if we look at VO2 max and the measurement of that is done on a milliliters per kilogram body weight basis, if you can look at total oxygen consumption, it allows me to hypothesize like, okay, what could happen if I was to commit to losing a certain amount of body mass. And the reasons I don't want to commit to doing that are, one, because I'm vain and it's aesthetics.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Two mainly is because I do have some strength and powerlifting goals for next year once this year of running is over. So, you know, building towards what will hopefully be a 200 or 300 mile event in the next few months. I do think that might be a limiting factor, but it's one that I'm willing to accept at the moment. And I'm sure, like the way I was trying to describe it is, if you imagine this as a performance funnel, you know, the thing you can get through a funnel is only as wide as the spout, and that's the thing for me. It's like, you know, can you change that? And for me, it's just things I'm not willing to do. Like, I enjoy my climbing, I enjoy my lifting, and I think there's also a part of, you know, I've got a history of strength and power sports, and there's also an element of it's difficult to let go of something that you've built over 20, 30, 20 odd years of lifting now. God, that makes me feel old. 20 odd years of lifting now. And one of the reasons why I did downsize from what I was previously, for anyone who doesn't know my history of
what is your peak weight and lowest lightest you've been? The
heaviest weight I've been, so we'll call it from being an adult, well, relative adult, some could say, at 18.
When you grew up?
When I grew up, when I was 35. When I was 42, I'm not 42. At my peak weight, I was around about 118, 119 kilograms, so what's that, 19-ish stone, give or take. I'm not good at converting old money to new money. I was a bit of a lump, a bit of a ball of humanity. If anyone wants to scroll from my old Instagram, you'll find that. I'd say my peak athlete weight was, I'd say where I felt my best, where I was like kind of a bit of an animal, was around 107, 108 kilos, and that's when I was like quite heavily involved in submission wrestling and grappling. But actually, since I turned 18, this is now, I think, the lightest I've been. I think I used to wrestle at 18, 19, and
what is your weight currently?
I was 87 point-ish kilos, give or take. I used to compete at 82.5 kilos in wrestling, but I used to cut weight for that when I was like 18, 19. So it's weird being the same weight now at 41 as some people would be at 18, and a lot of people would think that's like a good thing, but for me, there's an ego component with that, which is difficult to let go of when you can acknowledge it's a limitation.
So you're now the lightest person in the room.
I'm not the lightest person in the room.
So Ben, in your experience, someone who's training, well, we all know about the volume that Paul puts in. We know about the effort that he puts in and the consistency as well. What would you expect from his blood work?
I mean,
or is it anything
it's good to come into it,
because
it is actually fascinating, isn't it, talking about Paul? Because you are the ultimate unconquerable soul. You are a big
US1.
Yeah,
1.0.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that I look towards you as a bit of a objective for myself, as maybe not want to do, you know, ultra marathons in the future, or, you know, crazy activities that you do, but I do look at myself and think I would quite like to build on what I'm doing now and next year be a little bit better, and that is your whole mantra. So but what I find interesting is that just because you're doing this doesn't mean that all of the other stuff isn't important. So from my perspective as a doctor, what would I look for you? I'd want to keep you well recovered and operating within the right framework to be able to be the best version of yourself you can be on race day. Not everyone's going to be racing, but we all have things that we want to do. So whether it's work, whether it's hobbies, whether it's just time with your family, you want to not be fatigued at the end of the day. You want to be able to really engage with your kids and your family. You want to be able to, you know, do the 5Ks on a Saturday for the park run, or even just start your ball rolling on trying to get healthier than you are today. So when we look at your bloods, we'd be thinking, right, well, is there anything that could be standing in your way? So, we want to look at, are you adequately preparing yourself? Are you making sure that on balance you are feeding yourself the correct amount? Your vitamin profile is on point, and the trend is actually remaining steady and not falling. That generally there's no other diseases or pathologies that may well be creeping in that we need to be aware of on an early basis. And ultimately with Nuvictus, and the thing that I love about Nuvictus is the concept of whatever you are today, we want you to be better tomorrow. And that's the whole point. And that's health, that's wellness, that's the way that you think about yourself, the whole scope, the whole panel of how to live a better life. And with yourself doing all of these things, I mean, it could be quite dangerous to be someone who's, say, doing a marathon every single day without any kind of medical input. And I would try to avoid doing that, because I wouldn't want you to put yourself at risk, causing yourself, acute kidney injuries. I think that's what Nuvictus is all about, is trying to get to the point where we give solid information, we give solid supplementation, and we give people the opportunity to actually see data and actually see the data. You see the data, you understand the data. At the minute, that doesn't really happen. You don't get to see the data. You have, yes, that was fine, or no, that wasn't fine. And that's about it, really. So that's where I come from the Nuvictus perspective.
Based on the Nuvictus panel, are there any markers, and I'll drill you down on this, are there any specific markers that you think, again, people who train as intensely and with the volume that Paul does, that you would expect or would specifically look out for?
So when I was talking about the renal panel, that was probably one of the big ones, okay? Making sure you're adequately hydrated. But from the perspective of someone who's doing a lot of physical activity, that would be something that I would be wanting to monitor. The second one would be the fact that you're doing so much, you need to make sure that you're adequately nourished. So when you're in a situation where you're doing all of the exercise that you're doing, you're going to be burning through ingredients, absolutely burning through it. And we have deficits, we have energy deficits, but we also have vitamin and mineral deficits. So we do a vitamin profile, and we want to make sure that is adequately at an adequate level to be able to function. What is your full blood count doing as well? Are we producing adequate cells for you to be able to compete at the level that you're competing at? Or are you undernourished, and is your trend worsening? Are you giving yourself not the best opportunity to be able to operate at standard? Something else would be if you're overtraining. So testosterone is an interesting one. So if you're undertraining, your testosterone can fall. If you're overtraining, your testosterone can fall. So we also need to make sure that the balance is correct and that we have an equilibrium. So across the whole gamut of blood testing that we do, some of it is, are you adequately repairing and recovering? Are you adequately serving your needs? And what is going on from a trend perspective? Is there anything that could be standing in your way? And I suppose those are the main reasons that we do bloods. And I think that in reality, if the provision was higher, you'd probably say that an annual blood test for most people would be a good idea, regardless of who you are. So
do you think there's a relationship between the sort of volume of training or the type of athlete that a person is, and like how more regularly or less regularly, or is there specific key points at which you would say it's probably a wise time to get bloods now and what we might expect to find? So you mentioned testosterone there. So assuming my testosterone levels came back fine, even though I'm quite in the middle of just comes to the end of quite a dense training block, is there anything there where you would say, right, okay, actually this is something where, because of the nature of what you do, the frequency of testing would need to be increased in some way?
I think that's a really good question. And it's a difficult one to answer, because everyone's going to be doing different elements of activity. I think you can also add an element of health anxiety if you get to the point where you're doing it on a monthly basis. I think annual is probably about the right spot. You could maybe do a little bit more if you are someone who's doing a lot of exercise, because as you say, you're putting your body through a certain amount of not trauma, but work, and you want to make sure that you are staying on top of your of all your body's essential requirements. But would I do it for someone who's? I mean, I think that if you were a top athlete, then it would be something that you'd have to consult and consider on. From the Nuvictus point of view, I think that annually is a good way to be able to stay on top of your health and make sure that actually your general way of living is maintaining the numbers that you would require across the board.
And so, Paul, based on what he's just said of the service, the offering, there's nothing really like what we're bringing to market with the team, the product, the value out of Nuvictus paying for our subscribers' blood work. How do you envisage for yourself today undergoing the additional work that we do? Obviously, we're not going to VO2 max test everyone. We're not going to lactate threshold. We would love to at some point, but let's sell a few supplements first and get a few blood tests done. How do you envisage using the Nuvictus panel with your training, your knowledge, and what the data we'll find today? How does that come together for you?
So for me, the two components really are, if we think about nutrition and training as this kind of like intertwined, inescapable influence on each other. So the first thing for me is, before I go into these big longer events that are starting as of this weekend, I want to make sure that my baseline is my baseline. But for me in particular, I'm also looking at things like understanding the stress that my body is going to go through over the next 3 months, making sure that I'm in the, not just kind of like just ticking boxes. I want to make sure things are as optimal as possible. One of the challenges I've really had over the last few months is I spend a lot of time on the road doing what I do as a performance strategist. And so things like supplements are something, I always preach a food first approach, but to be honest, for me, supplements have been an increasingly important part of my regime, just because I am so busy. And it's not laziness with cooking, or it's not laziness in that regard, but when you are living in hotels, when you're on the road a lot and you need something to kind of get up, go, make sure you've got good nutrient quality, nutrient density in your diet, those things are essential to make sure that some of those markers on the panel, blood markers for vitamin and mineral status, are there. And obviously, if you look at things like zinc, overall dietary composition, if we were to look at dietary analysis, all of that kind of stuff is going to influence things like testosterone levels, which we know endurance athletes can tank. And actually not just endurance athletes, we were discussing the other day about one of my athletes who's 18 years of age, whose testosterone is super low through the floor. And you look at then the nutritional components. So when we're combining that with the testing element today, what I'm looking to do then is twofold. So the blood panel is more about maintaining a baseline of health, and then in the long term seeing the impact that is having on me. And then from the other testing today, it's more about the sort of fuel usage and the understanding of kind of where my long duration endurance paces are going to be. And also in terms of not just fuel usage, in terms of energy expenditure at any given specific speed, because one of the challenges of ultramarathons is that you are off in the hills and mountains and valleys and sometimes river and mud and bog. So average paces kind of go out the window. But for me, it's really tuning in what's going on physiologically for me with things like rate of perceived exertion. That becomes, so that's like effort levels. That for me is my own internal kind of marker of what I should be doing, the paces I should be running at. So my pace is going adrift over the space of the 12, 14, 16 hour, eventually what will be 4.5 days of basically consistent movement, which sounds crazy when I say it out loud. In my head, it doesn't sound quite so nuts. But within that as well, it's understanding where those sort of physiological thresholds are, so that I can work out like how many grams of carbohydrates I need, how much fat I need and are utilizing. And actually, it might just be that even the data we take today might mean that, for example, if I'm not oxidizing fats very effectively, it might mean that I need to shift my nutrition approach over the next few months to become more fat adapted, if you will, or at least more metabolically flexible, so that I can actually take on a variety of foods. Because one of the issues that people, when you translate, say, marathon running up to ultra distance, is that being able to consume a variety of foods is massively important psychologically, like food is mood, as they say. So the testing today really is, although we're going to look at the fuel usage, I'm not really too worried about what my maximum oxygen uptake is. It's important and it's a limiting factor on performance, but for me it's more about, I guess it's figuring out where my physiological cliff edges are and making sure I don't go off them. So that's from the blood work, and it's also from the testing today. It's like, if you stay in this zone, you are happy, your body's happy, you're not accumulating specific types of fatigue. I'm not going to turn this into a physiology lecture because
There's plenty of time for that.
There's plenty of time for that.
Plenty of time for that.
So
plenty of those to come.
So for me, there's that element of
if that goes well,
that element of understanding my body's now fairly good health. Also, then the big one is in relation to 300, the biomarker loop race basically today that helped me say, well, actually, if there's something I am, my North Walian friends, insufficient in North Wales, Macedonia, and that's basically a loop race where then you can sign up to do 100 miles, 200 miles, 400 miles now, basically, and then the scientists, as long as you can within that period, let's say we target is 300 miles, I'd be happy with 200 to be honest, high fat diet, 250 at this point. So we'll see how it goes. And so, there's specific cut-offs you've got to make within that intake, high testosterone 100 miles within. I think if we increase that, so this event this weekend, so it starts to test at a slower pace to see how I feel after 50 miles. I want to teach it, and then I help people understand onwards and hopefully make those autonomy is a massive thing. So that's what I'm training for at the moment, of their own health. So biomarkers guide those processes, but I think my role fundamentally is to use my experience, educational background, and knowledge of working with clients to really give a kind of depth of knowledge, but also autonomy to the members of the community, which I'll be taking a leading role on, and that's done through the courses that we will develop. So the courses will be developed to kind of, I think I described it in the first video in terms of our kind of like free introductory nutrition course, is this idea of like kind of giving people the ingredients to bake the cake without worrying in too much depth of like why the oven needs to be at that temperature or how the ingredients are farmed type stuff. So that's kind of what I want to do with that, is to kind of use my experiences to show how we can use these things to kind of optimize our health performance, regardless of what people's specific goals are. I think if you take something to an extreme, it might not be entirely relatable to a lot of people who maybe watch this. However, I do think that if you can learn lessons from that, then if most people are doing like 50% of the care and attention that I try to put into myself, and sometimes miss because sleep gets disrupted and all of that kind of stuff, hence why this is a great product for me in particular, that we have an opportunity to kind of learn from my successes, mistakes, failures, so that if people do want to run a park run, do a couch to 10k, just be a bit fitter and healthier, those lessons can be learned, and I'm going to try and document those lessons as best I can. So that's the other part of the reason of doing the testing today for me, is to show people what the full gambit of performance analysis and assessment is. And if you can just take little segments of that, and if it's something that interests you, then there are plenty of facilities out there to get it done if that's where you want to go. But the blood work for me is a foundation for everything. So that's the most important thing that I want to get today. Well, what we've gotten today already is that, because that for me tells me, is my body well prepared enough, rested enough, recovered enough to actually do what I want it to do? And if it's not, then that's something that I need to rectify pretty quickly before the real serious stuff starts to unfold in the next few weeks' time.
Okay, so that video ended a little bit abruptly there. So I just wanted to do a quick little update before we move on to the next YouTube video we're going to put together as a team. All the test results are back now. Everything was sort of fine, a few things to work on. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that. And please check out our next episode where we're going to go into a little more detail in terms of what the blood markers meant, things I can optimize, and how my actual events went for the week. So obviously there's some training been done since then. So all of those boxes have been ticked. And I'm now sat a few days out from my first actual race of the year. And so yeah, we'll update you on those things real soon.